G'day and welcome to the Posier's Printing Cave. My name's Andrew Dahl and I'm here today to take you through the process of assembling one of our police box kits. Now the kit I'm doing today is the wine rack and bar, but the basic principles I'll cover apply to both that and the bookcase version of the kit. Now I'm going to do the video in a number of sections. The first section I'm going to look at the site preparation and the tools that you're going to need to prepare. Then we'll look at how to prepare your timber parts for assembly. Then we'll assemble the main body, followed by the doors, the top assembly. We'll go through the wiring process and the fitting of the lights before we bring it all together at the end. So this first section is about the site preparation and the tools. And in terms of site preparation, what I have here is a space that's around about the size of a single car garage. I've got it organised and I've got all of my tools prepared and laid out. So let's look at the tools that you're going to need. And the first thing you would normally reach for in a woodworking project would be your trusty tape measure. Now I do have it here in case I need it, but because all the parts have been cut out by us using the CNC router and the computer, it's very unlikely that you'll need it. Everything should be at exactly the correct dimension. The next thing you normally reach for in a woodworking project is your saw and your hammer. Now we will use the hammer probably, particularly when we're fitting the back of the bar or bookcase, but mostly, again, this is here for show. If we do need to persuade a couple of parts to join together, then my preferred tool is this one, a nice rubber mallet, which is much less likely to damage the surface of the timber. Okay, what else have I got here? I've got a craft knife, always handy just for little tiny trimming jobs, so the craft knife will be used. I've got a couple of files. Particularly useful will be the square ones, so this square file and the flat file with the square corner. I find these quick grip clamps to be particularly useful, especially when you're working on your own. They can act as that extra set of hands. Now for trimming small bits of timber, I've got a nice sharp chisel here. This is a 20mm, that will be fine. And I've also got, for cleaning up the timber, a tool you may not be familiar with. This is a deburring tool. Now for the $5 or $10 this is going to cost at the hardware store, this is well worth the investment. I'll go through how this is used in the next section, but very, very useful. Now to clean up the parts, there is a fair bit of sanding involved in this project. The parts do come to you in a state that I can only describe from the router as furry, so they will need to be sanded before you can assemble. Now I've looked at a number of different ways to do this, and I've looked for power tools, but eventually at the end of the day a lot of it will be done by hand. So you will need some hand sanding equipment. So that means a hand sanding block and sandpaper. You can buy these block assemblies all ready to go, and they're quite good, although they do wear out quickly. But my preferred hand sanding tool is this one. It's a rubber sponge. It's got a nice ergonomic grip, so it's not too hard on the hand and arm, and it just has Velcro replaceable pads as you wear them out. So I highly recommend one of these with the nice ergonomic grip. I do use power sanding tools such as this belt sander, but generally this is not going to be in the preparation. This will be in the final finish when all the parts are together. If I do have to cut any parts with the saw, again, it's unlikely. My preferred tool is this hacksaw. It's got a nice fine tooth, which means it's much less likely to split the veneers of the timber. Okay, that brings me to the power tools we will definitely be using, and the first one I've got here is a cordless screwdriver. You'll definitely want one of these. And this is the one I'll use for the screw, for all the screws, and it's I highly recommend you get one like this with the adjustable torque setting. Now we're dealing with 12mm plywood. It's a good strong material, but it will split. And also if you drive your screws in too hard, you can easily strip the timber out of the thread so the screws no longer grip. So what you want to do is to get a cordless screwdriver with an adjustable torque setting and set the torque level so that we just achieve the right amount of tension that we want. Very easy with power tools to overdrive the screws and either strip the thread or crack the timber. So that's the cordless screwdriver. The other thing you're going to need is a drill. Now all of the screws that you put in, you're going to want to pilot drill a hole into the timber, and you're going to want to countersink the top part of the hole so the screw heads fit flush with the surface. Now you can do that in two parts. You can drill first and then use a countersink bit to countersink the holes on top. Or, again, $15–20 at the hardware store I found this little kit, and what it is pilot drills with countersink heads already fitted. And that's what I have fitted here to my drill. So pilot drill with the drill and then countersink all at the same time. A great time saver and well worth the money. Right, that brings me to my consumables. So I've got my PVA glue, I've got some wood filler and a spatula just to smooth it off and remove the excess, and then I have my screws and nails. Now we've got 3 different types of screws in the kit, so let's go through what they're for. The first one, and probably the one you use the most, is the 8 gauge 30mm, this one here. Now you need to be aware that this one will actually go through 2 layers of plywood. So if I show you 2 layers of plywood together, this screw will go through and poke through the other side. So this screw is not to be used where you only have 2 sheets of plywood together. That's when you use this shorter screw, the 20mm screw, to screw those 2 panels together. This one, the 30mm screw, that's for when panels meet at 90 degrees. Okay, so this screw, again, through here, and the 30mm screw is the one to use in that situation. Now the other screws I've got are the little short 4 gauge ones. So this screw here, that's only for use in doing things such as fitting the windows to the doors, fitting the panels to the doors, and maybe some of them in the back of the bookcase or wine rack. And lastly, I have a few of these panel nails, which again I'll use to fit the back of the bookcase or wine rack once the whole product is assembled. Okay, that's about it for the preparation. Next thing we need to do with these tools is to prepare our timber parts for assembly. Okay, well here we are again, and in this section we want to talk about the preparation of your parts for assembly. Obviously most of your bookcase or wine rack is made of timber, mostly 12mm plywood. It's come straight from the CNC router, and it's in a state that I can only describe as furry. So what we need to do is clean all that up, get all the parts ready for assembly, and then most probably before we start assembly, paint. And I recommend that you do paint before you start assembly. You will still need to paint at the end because you need to cover up all of your screw holes and any imperfections that have occurred in the construction process. But much better to do the bulk of the painting here on the table with a roller, very simple, rather than having your head stuck inside a bookcase trying to paint the underside of a shelf. Okay, so preparation of the parts. What are we looking for? Well, first of all, we've got this furry edge. As I said, this is from the router tool that's cut out the parts. Obviously, we want to remove all this fur. But there are a couple of other things that we need to look for as we go through the preparation of the parts. And the first thing I want to talk about is how the parts were cut. Now, they were cut with a computerized router using this tool here, which as you can see is round. So how does a round tool cut a square corner? Well, it's pretty easy to cut a square corner on the outside. The tool can just go past and then it can come down, and on the outside it's very easy to have a square corner. But how do you cut a square corner on the inside? Now that's very difficult. So let's look at my improvised whiteboard here. So if we wanted to slot this piece of timber into this board, that's the sort of hole that we would want to cut. As you can see, it's got nice square corners, and the board would fit up into the corners without a problem. Very nice. But we can't cut those square corners with that round tool. It's not possible. If we cut that square out with the round tool, what we'd have here in each corner is a curve that would be the radius of the cutter. And if we have that curve, then obviously our square board is not going to fit up into the corner because there's material here that's in the way. Now, how do we get round that? Well, in the computer program that cut out your panels, all of the corners that require it have been fitted with what we call fillets. And the fillets that we use are called dog bone fillets. So let me just show you what a dog bone fillet looks like. And it's a bit rough, but as you can see, what's happened with the tool path is the round tool has come along and moved up a little bit into each corner to create a space, and that space should be enough to allow the board to fit up into the corner. Now there's a bit of a compromise to be had here, because if we make this space really big, we can guarantee that the board will get up into the corner. But once we've fitted the parts, we'll have all this space here that we need to fill with filler to get a finished surface. Okay, now if we make the fillet too small, it will be much more like this one and the part won't fit into the corner. So we're trying to compromise between having just enough of a dog bone fillet to allow the parts to fit in the corner and not having so much that we have to fill a gap at the end once we've fitted the parts together. Now when we do this compromise, sometimes we don't get it 100% right. We come close, but you will find some of these dog bone fillet corners don't quite allow the parts to fit up into the corner. Now I keep them quite small because it's better, I think, for you to just square out the corner a little bit before assembly than it is for you to be filling lots and lots and lots of tiny little holes at the corner of every joint. So as you go through, you need to look at your parts, look in the corner, see if there's a nice 90 degree. And I can see here that there is a fillet, but these parts don't quite join. There is about a millimetre, or probably less than that, maybe half a millimetre gap here. If I slide that, because there's a little bit of material right there in the corner that's preventing this from meeting at a right angle. So what I'm going to do, just to fix this up, I'm going to take my trusty chisel and I'm going to just push it in to the corner, a little bit of a wiggle, and then flick out that material. Push in, flick out. Might go the other way. Push in, a little bit of a wiggle, flick it out. And now we'll find that we have squared out that corner and those two parts fit nicely. If it's difficult to get the chisel in there, you could use the square or the flat file with the square corner. And again, just into the corner, just square out that fillet so you get a nice square fit at every corner where two parts have to mate up together. So that's the first thing to look out for, is to make sure all your fillets allow for a square connection at the corners. The next thing to look out for on the edges is what we call tabs. Now when all the parts are on the sheet, they're cut out by the router. If they weren't connected to the sheet in some way at the end, as the router finishes the cut, they fly off all over the workshop. So to prevent that, what the computer program does is at the bottom of each cut, every now and then along the cut length, it does what we call a tab. Okay, so here's a massive enlargement of a tab. If you imagine these hashed areas to be the material and this gap to be where the router blade has been running along cutting the material, what happens is as the router blade comes along and cuts, it gets to a point, it lifts up a little bit off the bottom of the router table, travels along and then goes down to the full thickness again. So what we have here is a little bit of timber that is connecting the part we're cutting from the sheet. Now once the sheet's been cut, we use our craft knife and we just cut that tab so we can take the piece out of the sheet. But what you might find is you've got this little piece of timber still on the edge of your particular parts. So you need to look out for these tabs. They'll be along the edge at various spacings. They're there to hold the parts on the table when we cut them so they don't fly off, but we need to remove them. So if we look here on this part here, we've got a little bit of a tab here, and it's a question of our trusty craft knife, or we can just sand them away or file them away. It doesn't take much to remove the tabs, but you do need to be aware that they're there. Okay, so that's the two main things to watch out for when you're actually preparing the parts. So make sure your fillets allow for a square connection between your boards, and make sure that you look out for your tabs and remove your tab parts. Now let's look at removing the fur. So here we have, this is a part here that's, as you can see, it's quite furry. There's been a lot of material here that needs to be removed. Now you can just do it with a sander. Okay, so just run your sander along there, but I did tell you that there was a tool that would save you a huge amount of time. And used in conjunction with the sander, I find this very, very quick. And it's called the deburring tool. So what it is a little blade on a swivel that tracks as you pull it along, and you can run it along the edge of the panel. Now they're probably more designed for metal, and one of the problems I do find with this tool is while it's very, very effective, it does tend to track with the grain of the plywood. So you need to be careful how you use this, but if you use it carefully, it will save you a great deal of time. So let me just show you how you use it. It doesn't particularly like end grain, but we'll just bring it along here. So we put it on the edge, and then we just track our knife along the edge. Now it will go around corners, so it'll go around that corner and then along there. Now as you see, that is end grain, and it didn't do that particularly well because it doesn't like end grain that much. But when I track along here, you'll find I get a nice little shaving. I can track around the corner. Very, very good for running with the grain, although just be careful, because if you apply too much pressure, it will split into the grain and start to peel too much material away. Okay, so very, very useful. And if I flip this over to this very, very furry edge here, you'll see how useful the tool can be. Now, because it's end grain, it hasn't removed all of it, but it's certainly cleaned up the majority, which means it's now very, very easy with a quick run of the sanding block to remove the extra material. Generally, you'll find these deburring tools have a swivel, so as I said, they will go around corners. So if you go through this wine rack shelf here, you can go along the inside, turn around the corner, and look back out all in one motion. Okay, so the deburring tool, very, very useful. What I generally do is track the deburring tool all the way around the edge of the panel on both sides. Once I've done that, I take my sander, run it along the edges just to remove any final fur, and then in most cases the part is ready to go. Okay, so in terms of preparation, we're going to go through all of our timber parts, deburr and sand the edges, check that all of our fillets are squared out ready for connection, and remove any tabs. Once we've done that, we're ready for assembly, and that'll be the next section, starting with the main body of the bookcase or wine rack.